Well, voting has ended in widely discredited referendums organised by Russia in 4 occupied regions in Ukraine. As expected, Russia is claiming that an overwhelming majority of residents are in favour of joining Russia, but not all the votes have yet been counted. Ukraine and the West have condemned the 5-day vote as a sham and an attempted land grab by Moscow. Well, Russia's president claims he just wants to help people living there. Nearly 4 million people from the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk and the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia were to attend polling stations and vote. Well, the areas in question represent 15% of Ukraine's territory. That's roughly the size of Portugal. But how many of these votes were given freely is in dispute, as the BBC's Hugo Bachega explains.
We've heard reports, though, from residents, accounts from people on the ground saying that soldiers are going door to door, forcing people to vote. Ukrainian officials are saying that in some towns, residents have been banned from leaving. Some workers have been threatened with losing their jobs if they do not join this process. So it seems that people are being forced to take part in this so-called referendum.
So could the results be legitimate? Here's our World Affairs editor, John Simpson.
Kherson, which probably contains the greatest number of people that don't want to have anything to do with Russia, is supposedly voted 97% in favour of moving into Russia, of going into Russia. Zaporizhia, 98%. Donetsk, 98%. Luhansk, 98%. I mean, these are ludicrous.
Well, the UK's Ministry of Defence has said Vladimir Putin could announce the annexation of occupied regions of Ukraine when he addresses Russia's parliament as early as Friday. We heard earlier that Putin has justified the votes as helping people living in these territories who consider themselves Russian. But there is another school of thought as to his motivation, as one of Ukraine's former prime ministers explains.
Ukraine launched a number of counteroffensives, and Putin failed at the battlefield. So now he wants actually to secure this area in order to commit another war crime and to commit another international crime against the sovereign Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine has said any of its citizens who've helped with Russia's self-styled referendums will face treason charges and at least 5 years in jail. It's accused Uruguay, Belarus, Syria, Egypt, Brazil, Venezuela, Togo and South Africa of unlawfully seeking to legitimise the votes. Uruguay has denied this, with the Foreign Ministry tweeting that it does not back actions of any kind aimed at legitimising the occupation through use of force of part of Ukrainian territory. Well, here's the country's foreign minister speaking on Monday.
Nuestro país lo ha condenado en los términos más firmes.
Our country has condemned it in the strongest terms as a clear violation of the principles on which we have built this organisation and which must be respected by all its members. It is imperative that the Russian Federation cease hostilities and withdraw as soon as possible from Ukrainian territory.
Well, the EU says it will impose sanctions on any organisers of the so-called referendums. Meanwhile, the UN has also expressed concerns about reports from Russia of nearly 2,400 protesters being arrested since President Putin's order to partially mobilise troops for the war in Ukraine last Wednesday.
We call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained and for the authorities to abide by their international obligations to respect and ensure the rights to freedom of expression and of peaceful assembly.
The Kremlin said last week that 300,000 Russians would be summoned, with priority given to those with military experience. However, Vladimir Putin admitted on Monday that there had been errors in who was being called up, with reports of elderly people and those with disabilities receiving a summons. Across Russia, there have been a spate of attacks on enlistment offices. More than a dozen have been set on fire. However, there are also those who support the sign-up, as the BBC's Steve Rosenberg found out when he visited a military conscription office.
I'm in the mood to fight, says Dmitry, an HR manager. Since we've been drafted, we have to serve. This mother says the lads will run about a bit there. They'll lose a bit of weight. It'll be fine.
Well, Russia says it has not asked for the extradition of thousands of Russian citizens who've rushed into neighbouring countries following the call-up of extra soldiers to fight in Ukraine. Places such as Belarus and Uzbekistan have reported a surge in the number of those crossing their borders. Finnish authorities said almost 17,000 Russians crossed the border into Finland last weekend alone. That's an 80% rise from a week earlier. Well, these satellite images show long vehicle queues on Russia's borders with Georgia and Mongolia. The BBC's Rehan Dmitry is at the upper Larsi border, crossing from Russia into Georgia, and sent us this report.
There's a flow of people coming across. Some are on their bikes, many are crossing the border by foot, some are in their cars, people are dragging their suitcases behind. All of them are looking exhausted, hungry, but also relieved to be here. This is the point of safety for them. Many people told me that it took them days to cross the border, and there are many thousand more people on the Russian side. There are all sorts of issues going on the Russian side. People have to pay bribes to avoid being in a queue for too long. But once here, they're being met by taxi drivers that are haggling prices with them. Many people, for some reason, want to purchase their bikes. I can see even with the flat. The question is, what sort of welcome will they get once here in Georgia? Georgia had its own war with Russia back in 2008, and many people here are extremely concerned about such big influx of the Russians. They're concerned because they think it's a security threat. They're worried that the Russian government might decide to come and protect its own citizens like it's done before. So therefore, the feelings are really mixed. But at the moment, these people are coming through. There are lots of Russians already in the capital, Tbilisi. It's putting an enormous pressure on the capital, shortages with rental accommodation and so on.
It's Rehan Dmitry there. Well, the president of Kazakhstan, which also borders Russia, has said his country has to ensure the safety of large numbers of Russians who've crossed the border in recent days. 98,000 Russians have entered the country since the mobilization was announced.
There is a large-scale war going on in the immediate vicinity of us. Bearing this in mind, we must first of all think about the security of our country. The territorial integrity of states must be inviolable. This is a key principle. I've always spoken about this openly and clearly in the international arena.
Alongside those who are fleeing over the borders are those who have hastily purchased overpriced tickets to countries such as Montenegro and Turkey, where Russians currently don't need visas to enter. Alexander is one such person. He says there's no sense in going back to Russia.
I want to live. I do not want to go to war. This is not our war. We're not protecting our homeland. We're attacking our neighbours, our brothers. We are trying to occupy territories that do not belong to us, and which, as far as I'm concerned, we do not need. It is Ukrainian territory, and I definitely will not fight for that, let alone die for it.
And meanwhile, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry investigating alleged human rights violations in Ukraine has concluded war crimes have been committed. Their report is based on evidence they've collected between February and July and found human rights violations by both Russia and Ukraine. Is the head of the Rights Monitoring Mission.
Following several field visits to settlements in Kiev and Chernihiv regions, we've corroborated willful killings of civilians by Russian armed forces. In some cases, they shot civilians while fleeing in their vehicles, crossing the road on foot, or gathering basic foodstuffs, sometimes by snipers.
Well, let's look now at another story concerning Russia. European countries are investigating mystery leaks in two major gas pipelines between Russia and Europe. This footage from the Danish military shows one of the leaks in the Baltic Sea. The Danish Energy Authority say gas bubbles are reaching the surface of the ocean in an area of 100 metres in diameter. Sweden's Seismological Institute has reported underwater blasts. Well, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline stretches more than 1,000 kilometres under the Baltic Sea from the Russian coast near St. Petersburg to northeastern Germany. Neither it nor its twin Russian-owned pipeline, Nord Stream 2, are currently in operation, although they do both still contain gas. Well, the cause of the damage is unclear, but authorities have not ruled out sabotage. To put this into context, here's the BBC's Damien McGuinness, who is in Berlin.
Nord Stream 1 for many years has been the main source of Russian gas to Europe via Germany. Nord Stream 2, very controversial project, was stopped just before it opened by the German authorities just days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And what Russia is accused of doing traditionally over the whole summer really is using gas as a weapon. That's why gas has been reduced, coming towards Germany via Europe, and that's one of the contributing factors to rising prices.
Yes, and those rising prices are a key issue that many European countries are trying to grapple with. But it's not thought the leaks will have any significant impact on that. Poland's Prime Minister has, though, accused Vladimir Putin of using the Nord Stream pipelines as instruments of war. He didn't directly accuse anyone of attacking the pipelines, but the implication was clear.
Today we have to deal with an act of sabotage. We do not yet know the details of what happened, but we clearly see that this is an act of sabotage. This is an act that probably signals a new phase in the escalation of the situation in Ukraine.
But the Kremlin also expressed concerns about the damage to the pipelines, also without pointing any fingers. Here's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov.
The pressure really has fallen significantly. The situation is unprecedented and requires immediate investigation. We're extremely worried by this news. No option can be ruled out right now. It's clear that there is damage to the pipeline.
Well, one expert is clear about who he thinks is to blame.
When you look at the complexity of the attacks and how difficult it is to carry out such an act of sabotage, then it's most likely that a state actor is involved. And there are only one state actor in the Baltic that is where the possibility, the capabilities and the motivation come together, and that is obviously Russia.
Well, Ukraine has also accused Russia, saying the alleged actions amount to nothing more than a terrorist attack. Another analyst says the verdict is still out on what has caused the leaks.
No one has been caught red-handed during this operation, so I still think it's mostly about technical issues, but it remains to be seen.